trance and prosper. Hi, I'm Dr. Brian David Phillips, and welcome to Revisionary Reissues. I've gone over the levels of adaptation from literature to film. Now, I'd real quick like to run through some of the revisionary ratios that take place. Now, these are from a collection of various pieces on film and literature. When I talk about poetry, I tend to use, I'm old school. I'm old and I go to school. I like Harold Bloom's work, partly because it's so weird. And I've done adaptations from Bloom to literary ratios for literature to film. However, for my students and NCCU, National Junction University, this is a nice breakdown of various ways that films are revised by filmmakers that is, when literature is taken and adapted to film. Poets' work goes through revisionary ratios when appropriated by later writers, so does literary text when it's adapted to film. We can see that there are a variety of strategies which the filmmaker may adopt when adapting literature to the cinema, as Giannetti tells us. These strategies include what I'll be talking about today, but they're not necessarily the only ones, okay? So first we have literal faithfulness, and that is when, for instance, when he was directing Little Women, George Cukor expressed a policy of keeping in the faults or problems of the original, as well as the virtues of the classic text, or not smoothing it out of fear of losing the atmosphere, essence, and quality that made it a classic in the first place. Essentially, literal faithfulness attempts to stay as close to the original as possible. The original Harry Potter films were like that, literal faithfulness. Now, once we've determined that a playwright or a literary piece is not going to translate well to film, or because of other reasons, the filmmakers may make changes. These are called cinematic correction. Okay, the cinematic correction based upon the writer or director's assumptions of what should have happened. In other words, the filmmaker is a revisionist. He's revising the film, the literary work for the film. Harold Pinter would usually focus first on what he saw as a classic's weaknesses, and then he would work backwards from them, correcting them and offering a different perspective on them. For example, in The Go-Between, Burgess's suicide, or the pre-Raphaelite paraphernalia in The French Lieutenant's Woman from Signiard, who points that out first. Okay. Now, there are other revisionary ratios, and the next one would be relevance to time, or changes to make the story relevant to the times of the film. There are key changes that are made to the narrative of Bernard Malamud's The Natural, so that the film version, which was by Barry Levinson, conformed to the optimistic mood of Reagan's America. In another light, the BBC's adaptation of Charles Dickens' Bleak House seems fired and inspired by contemporary anger, given the hideous cruelty and hypocrisy of the Victorian age that Dickens so devastatingly uncovers. It seems to say, could anyone but a historical simpleton and cultural imbecile seriously propose it as an example to follow and wish to take our political fortunes in that direction? Also from Signiard. And I will obviously give you the references in class to the Signiard piece. Okay. Changes made because of differences in the medium of film and literature. Literature and film are not the same. They're They're very, very different. And sometimes even the same author makes changes uh, from film and literature. Okay, so for instance, Peter Shaffer wrote Amadeus the play. He also wrote Amadeus the film. Shaffer's Amadeus is very different in its film incarnation than in its stage version. Yet both were written by the same very talented writer. Shaffer referred to the process of writing the film as trying to have the same baby twice. With the film, the writer could rely much more on precise visual elements to convey the mood in ways impossible with the drama. He also found it possible to explore plot elements which he did not pursue in the stage version. This is also true of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Mamet's played with the stage version and the film version in very different ways. The dinosaurs on a rampage scenes in the novel Jurassic Park are far more gruesome and detailed in terms of their violence than the film shows. In the book, the author needed to express the horror of the situation. Okay, Crichton chose to do so with graphic violence. The film didn't have to capture the gore present in this atmosphere so vividly, as it could achieve the same effect by showing the dinosaurs. This is also related to rating systems in Hollywood. And also it's related to next point that Steven Spielberg simply doesn't want to make movies with graphic, realistic violence. Which brings us to our next revisionary ratio, which of course is filmmaker or actor style. These are changes made because of the filmmaker style or the actors in the film. The film version of Mark Medoff's Children of a Lesser God all but eliminates the character of Orrin Dennis, much to my own sadness, for I played the character on stage. It's a wonderful role for a stage actor. But in the film, Orrin is all but gone, and he's an important element in the play. Giving many of the characters' functions were given to James Leeds in the film version, focusing more on the relationship between the teacher and his deaf student lover. That because we have a star vehicle for William Hurt, the actor. Ridley Scott's film Blade Runner barely resembles its source, Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, partly because Harrison Ford was sought as the star of the film. Since Ford's films tend to be action-adventure, changes were made in Dick's rather cerebral, sitting around and thinking a lot storyline so that the film portrays a man of action and not one of inaction, a Hamlet-esque kind of character who sits around philosophizing. Actually, the only resemblances to the original story for Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Blade Runner are the names of the replicants and that of the protagonist, the hero. The result's a great movie. Okay, it's absolutely one of my favorite films, although it's only very loosely associated to the original source material. Our next revisionary ratio is that of perceived preferences of audience. That is, changes are made because of the perceived preferences in the film's target audience. Richard Matheson's Somewhere in Time was changed in the film version. The subtext of the entire adventure being the result of the main character's brain tumor was dropped. Yes, it was a brain tumor. Sorry to ruin the romance for you. Why? Because filmmakers were making their movie for an audience looking for romantic escapism. And you bring in brain cancer, and it's just way too much of a downer. Matheson's films are often made into, his novels are often made into movies. I Am Legend, Stir of Echoes, and so many more. And there's often some changes made for various reasons. Okay? This is an excellent example, though. It just was assumed by the filmmakers that the audience would not appreciate the twist ending with the whole thing just being the imaginations of a man suffering from a brain tumor causing hallucinations. It's a fantasy film, but well, let's not go into that kind of fantasy. Our next revisionary ratio of worth taking a look at is, of course, that there's previous exposure to the literary work. That is, changes are made to the story for the film because of previous exposure of the audience to the book. According to many filmmakers, many of the changes made to the narrative in a film version of, say, something like The Firm were made because the book had already had a massive readership before the film came out. The filmmakers who made that particular piece, The Firm, they felt they needed to make changes in the narrative so they could maintain suspense in the movie. If you have a whodunit and everybody knows who done it, um, let's make changes so somebody else done it. And that's one reason. That can be disappointing for some folks, but it can also be helpful and useful. Overall, no film follows any one revisionary ratio from the ones I'm listing here. But movie adaptations, rather, they usually use combinations of many various forces that guide the choices the filmmakers make. All right. Successful film adaptations tend to be those which strive to capture the spirit of the literary text rather than those which attempt to go with a literal interpretation. Franco Zeffirelli's screen version of The Taming of the Shrew, for example, is full of the life and the power of the original text and the text, although many of the scenes were cut or moved around, juxtaposed, or otherwise played with by the filmmaker. Because when you're making a movie, you're making a movie. You're not writing a novel. You have a certain amount of time that you can play with. Novels and even stage dramas are very different from film. And so we have to make choices in how we're going to adapt them or work them. However, sometimes the revisionary ratios work, sometimes not so much. But those are the revisionary ratios for my students in literature and film, but also for anybody else who wants to watch this video and learn a little bit. I also recommend that you check out the videos, the lectures we've done for the film and literature people on the levels of adaptation, literal, faithful, loose, which are similar to revisionary ratios, as well as check out the mythic structure material, the monomyth material, as well as the uncanny, and it's just a whole bunch of videos. Just watch every single video ever made. Yeah, do that. Okay, for now, though, this is Dr. Brian David Phillips saying, live, trans, and prosper. Bye-bye.